Mark my word, a combination airplane and motor car is coming. You may smile, but it will come. Henry Ford, 1940. I envy 70s kids, pressing their faces to the screen as John Williams' Star Wars theme plays loudly, yellow text moving obliquely towards the edge of the galaxy. I envy 70s kids trying to get closer to fantasy, attempting to pull the future into the present. America was full of hope, tottering hastily towards a technological age filled with grand expectations for the future. At the same time, Star Wars reflected its era's conflicts and concerns. George Lucas, the series creator, mentioned in 2005 in an interview with the Chicago Tribune that it was really about the Vietnam War. The small, guerrilla-style rebel alliance taking on a much larger, technologically advanced power is a not-so-subtle retelling of the dynamic between the American and the Viet Cong forces. The fear of democracies veering into dictatorships is also prominently represented in the film in the form of its main antagonist, the Galactic Empire. In spite of the series' bleak themes, Lucas succeeds in engendering a new hope, a vision of the future in which the hegemon is deposed. When I press my face to the screen, gigantic or handheld, now I only see rehashed franchises from yesteryears, stories from the last millennium represented with new actors, fictions from an indelible past that just won't budge. The concept of the slow cancellation of the future was first introduced by cultural theorist Mark Fisher in his book Ghosts of My Life, which was published in 2014. Briefly, Fisher identified our contemporary society as having lost its ability to imagine and strive for new futures and new transformative potentials. He believed that we were experiencing cultural stagnations. Styles were being repeated, old ideals were being reiterated, removing any cultural oxygen for novelty. He connected this stagnation with the economic situation in the West, where rampant capitalism and neoliberal policies from governments adopting austerity measures disincentivized the imagining of alternative futures in favor of the status quo. Pulling from Jacques Derrida, the French philosopher, he also noted the hauntological nature of our contemporary culture, always haunted by the lost potential of the past. These factors coalesce into this feeling of the lost future. Fisher's diagnosis, however, fails to properly assess the entirety of the causes. This feeling of stuckness that Fisher described, this idea of the slow cancellation of the future, these are symptoms of a culture not unable to imagine new futures, but rather to turn them into images. And this is, in parts the realism which he talks about in capitalist realism, right? The realism here is analogous to the deflationary perspective of a depressive who believes that any hope, any positive state is a dangerous illusion. New stories are being written. However, they're not crossing over to the realm of images. The future is not canceled, it has converged. The future is squeezed by the narrowness of our imagination, trampled by the crisis of fantasy. The slow replacement of imagination by images is now the predominant form of cultural production. The culture industry, in the wake of actor strikes, piracy, changing consumer behaviors, riveted to financial targets and desired return on investments, has been hemorrhaging capital and resources and both unable and unwilling to fund the creation of these new images. Except for Avatar, the 10 highest grossing science fiction films of the last 20 years all belong to the same 3 20th century franchises. And even Avatar, technically the treatment for it was written in 1994. The highest grossing sci-fi film of this year, Dune Part 2, is based on a novel, Dune, written in 1965. And it's already been adapted twice. When Dune's author, Frank Herbert, imagined the future depicted in the series in which feudal houses battle for control of the desert planet Arrakis, the sole source of the valuable resource known as spice, Herbert was inspired by a growing concern about environmental issues, as well as the growing use of psychedelics in 1960s America, often described as an allegory for control of oil in the Gulf. The story of Arrakis is underpinned by the Arab Cold War, the 3-decade-long conflict in the region between Soviet-backed nationalist forces and the US-backed conservative monarchies. At the same time, this concern of global pollution, resource scarcity, best epitomized by Paul Ehrlich's book, The Population Bomb from 1968. These are all themes that, of course, are still relevant today, but that are very, very prominent in Herbert's story. And they really reflect the era's sort of contemporary issues and concerns. And so I ask, where are our contemporary cinematic epics that address our unique social-cultural issues? The stakes of this pervasive rehashing of old content extend beyond the realms of entertainment. Science fiction's imaginary futures have long served as fodder for real-world technological innovations. Some of the children whose cheeks were warmed by the glittering glow of the cathode ray tube as they watched VHS tapes of Star Wars and Tron went on to create companies dedicated to building the future from their youthful dreams. Neil Stephenson's 1992 novel Snow Crash presented the world with the concept of the metaverse. Imagine the book as a fully immersive virtual reality in which people interact through and with other avatars. Facebook founder Mark Zuckerberg found the concept so influential, interesting, that in 2021 he changed the company's name to Meta, short for metaverse, signaling his desire to realize a version of Stephenson's idea. The book was also an inspiration for the development of Google Earth and was a mandatory reading for all members of the Xbox team led by Microsoft executive Jay Allard. These examples suggest that the role of technology is best understood not as an agent of capital, but rather as an agent of fantasy. Precisely because science fiction is so generative for our technological imaginaries, we need to be genuinely experimental, committed to an expansive reimagining not only of what technology is, but what the future can be, and most importantly, who gets to create it. As Fred L. Pollack, Dutch author and one of the founders of the field of future studies, explains in his book, The Image of the Future, we are continuously faced with the unknown, daunted and startled by its elusiveness and its inherent risk. We respond to it by carving images of the future. And we do so by splitting time into the now and the other, and the creation of another world to fill the other time. The logic of capitalist realism, to use, of course, Fisher's term, is the total abolition of the other until its disappearance. Pollack reminds us that images of the future are images of the totally other, and they're revolutionary and radical in nature, or they're nothing at all. To bend science fiction to the logic of the culture industry is to excise its othering potential, its capacity to truly spawn new alternative futures. We are stuck with visions that still abide by the current paradigms. As Clive Dilnot, a professor of design studies at the Parsons School of Design, has argued, modernity is defined by the creation of the future as a compensation for the loss of the organic continuity with the past. But what happens when the past is not lost? What happens when the past lingers, when the past is kept around, artificially propped up because it has a measurable success rate as a cultural product? In recent memory, Neptune Frost, the 2021 film by Anisia Uzeyman and Saul Williams, is a great example of such a modern film. One where the images disrupt the notion of hegemonic futurity, and they do this by anchoring them in a quickly disappearing and underexplored past. The film is set in a post-Civil War Burundi ruled by a totalitarian power known as the Authority. It opens with the funeral of an elder whose life is celebrated by a funeral mass and an inhumation on a lush grassy hill. The action cuts to a pit mine where workers use hand tools to extract columbite tantalite, a mineral used to create the tantalum capacitors that power devices like our mobile phones, our computers, so on and so forth. In the film, Surveilled by armed soldiers, the workers endure brutal conditions. After a soldier overseeing the mine kills his brother Techno, the miner, the protagonist Mataluza, is led on a journey to Digitaria, an e-waste dump site that hosts a collective of anti-authority hackers. The picture of the future in Neptune Frost is not glossy, white, chrome. This is not the future of 2001: Space Odyssey. Rather, this future is woven, earthly, embodied. Braided hair encodes knowledge like a secret algorithm. Speech breaks down into song, poetry, and dance. The often overlooked technologies brought to the forefront as elements of this alternative future. Centrally, by having a Colton miner as the protagonist, the film links futurity with materiality and labor. It directly addresses the question, who gets to create the future and who creates technology? Mataluza actually says this directly in one of the lines, speaking to the other individuals in the community that's called Unanimous Goldmine. He says, "We are the makers of technology." Cyberpunk, the genre created by William Gibson in his highly popular 1984 novel Neuromancer, presented a dystopian future anchored into the political realities of its time. A globalization of Reaganomics now dispersed into cyberspace. Paul Youngquist, a professor of English at the University of Colorado, writes in his paper, Cyberpunk, War and Money, Neil Stephenson's Cryptonomicon, cyberpunk was less of a departure and more of a destination. No other, rather a radical, accelerated continuation into the narrow alleyway of techno-political possibilities. Does this make sense? What I'm trying to say here is that the future in Neuromancer is one where we take our existing situation and we kind of just push it further, we accelerate it. We're not really trying to create some radical alternatives. We're really trying to see where the breakage point in our current existing paradigms lie. Neptune Frost breaks this exiguity by exploring the mineral elements that engender our imaginations. The disruption caused by Mataluza and Neptune are reminiscent of Legacy Russell's idea of the glitch, a cosmic error, an encrypted refusal, a mobilizing virus, but most importantly, a tool of survival. Nick Land, the prominent accelerationist thinker, proclaimed that nothing human makes out of the future. Neptune Frost retorts and says, "Blackness and the glitch survive." Through the outline of depicted dreams, we see fantastical machines whose functions cannot yet be put into words, whose ineffable futurities beckon further alternatives. The path ahead is towards the acceptance of the wretchedness of reality, the recognition of the hardship of labor that enables our current narrow technological thinking. Pollack mentions that the artist is the one capable of grasping at pieces of the other. Neptune Frost shows us that this is within reach, that the future can be found, excavated, mined, and held by its stewarding populations for their own uses and future self-determination. Nothing human makes it out of their future, but there are others. The future is here, just not evenly imagined.